Halfway through my daughter's wedding, she did something no bride is supposed to do. She stopped smiling. Her face, which had been glowing with pure joy just moments before, suddenly went pale. I watched from the front row as her grip tightened on her bouquet, the knuckles of her fingers turning white. The pianist continued playing Pachelbel's canon, completely unaware that something was shifting in that sanctuary. My husband would still be alive if he were here, watching her walk down this aisle, and I think somehow he knew something was wrong before I did. The guests kept shifting in their seats, sensing the energy change, but not understanding it. That's when my daughter did the unthinkable. She turned away from the altar, away from the man she was supposed to marry in approximately 40 seconds, and she walked straight to me. Her eyes were locked on mine, and I could see tears beginning to form at the corners. She reached into her bouquet, and her hands were trembling so badly that the white roses nearly dropped to the floor. She pulled out a note, just a single folded piece of paper, slightly crinkled from being tucked among the stems. She handed it to me without saying a single word. Everyone in that church was watching now. 200 guests, all frozen, all staring at what was happening in front of them. The groom stood at the altar, his smile slowly fading from his face as he realized something was wrong. He didn't know about the note. He had no idea what was coming. I unfolded that piece of paper with shaking hands, and on it, in my daughter's careful handwriting, was a single word: Mom. That single word meant everything. That single word meant she was finally ready to listen. That single word meant I had been right all along. That note saved my daughter's life. To understand the note, we have to go back 6 months. 6 months before that wedding day, my daughter Madison came home with the kind of news a mother dreams of hearing. She was engaged. She was in love. She was going to marry a man named Thomas Reeves, and she had never been happier in her entire life. Madison had always been the hopeful one in our family. After her father passed away 7 years ago, when she was just 19 years old, she could have become bitter. She could have closed her heart off to the world. Instead, she became more open, more trusting, more willing to believe that good things happen to good people. I worried about that sometimes. I worried that her optimism would make her vulnerable. When she met Thomas at a fundraiser gala downtown, she came home that night absolutely glowing. She had met him in the most romantic way possible, she said. He was standing alone by the grand piano, and he had asked her to dance. They danced for 3 songs straight while the string quartet played in the background. By the end of that evening, he had asked for her number. By the end of that week, he had asked her to dinner. By the end of that month, he had asked her to be his girlfriend. And by the end of that season, he had proposed. Everything about Thomas Reeves was perfect on the surface. He was tall, about 6'2", with dark hair that was always perfectly styled. He had a jawline that could cut glass, and he smiled in a way that made people feel like they were the only person in the world that mattered to him. He worked in finance, he said. Something vague about investment management. He had a nice car, a Tesla that he was constantly upgrading. He had a beautiful condo downtown with a view of the city skyline. He dressed in expensive clothes, always wearing the right designer brands. He had impeccable manners. He knew which fork to use at a 5-course dinner. He knew how to talk to people's parents. He knew exactly what to say to make people feel comfortable around him. What he was really good at, though, what he was a master of, was asking questions. At first, the questions seemed innocent enough. He wanted to know everything about Madison. What was her favorite color? What was her favorite book? What did she dream about doing? Those questions made sense. A man in love should want to know these things about his fiancée. But then the questions started to shift. He asked about her house. How much had we paid for it? What was the neighborhood like? Were we thinking about selling anytime soon? He asked about my job. How much did I make? Did I have a pension? Was there life insurance through my employer? He asked about Madison's inheritance. I had never really talked to her about this much, but when Thomas was around, suddenly it came up. He asked how much my late husband's life insurance had paid out. He asked if there were any trusts set up. He asked about property that my husband had owned separately. He asked about family heirlooms and whether they had any monetary value. It started to feel less like curiosity and more like an inventory. like he was cataloging our family's assets. I remember the night I first expressed my concerns to Madison. We were sitting in the kitchen, just the two of us, on a Saturday afternoon. I was making her favorite pasta, the one my mother had taught me to make when I was her age. I stirred the pot slowly and tried to find the right words. I didn't want to sound like the paranoid mother who didn't want to let her daughter go. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked at her across the kitchen counter and I said, "Madison, sweetheart, I have something I need to talk to you about. And I want you to know that I'm only saying this because I love you so much." She looked up from her phone, where she had been texting with Thomas, and she smiled at me. She had his smile now. Or at least, she had started mimicking his smile. That sudden shift in my daughter's expression should have been my first real warning. "Of course, Mom." "What's wrong?" she asked. "I've noticed that Thomas asks a lot of questions about our family's finances," I said carefully. "About our property, about insurance, about inheritance. And I'm starting to wonder if those questions are coming from a place of genuine love, or if there might be something else going on." She laughed. Actually laughed at me. "Mom, come on. He's just trying to know our family better. He's probably thinking about our future together. Of course he wants to know about finances and all that." That's actually very mature of him. I wanted to push back. I wanted to tell her that in my 58 years of life, I had learned to read people pretty well, and my instincts were screaming at me that something was deeply wrong. But I also knew that if I pushed too hard, I would lose her. She would pull away from me and closer to him. So I let it drop. I finished making the pasta, and we ate together, and she told me all about the wedding plans she and Thomas had been making. By the end of that night, she had convinced me that I was just being paranoid. I was a widow. I had raised her alone after her father died. Of course I was going to be protective. Of course I was going to see danger where there might not be any. Thomas was just a man in love. I was just a mother afraid of losing her daughter. Right? If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to all of Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The warning signs got worse after that. Thomas started to isolate Madison from me in subtle ways. He would suggest that maybe we shouldn't have coffee every Sunday like we always had. He would say things like, "I know your mom is great, but don't you think it's important for us to have our own time together as a couple? We need to establish our own traditions." She started canceling plans with me. She started making excuses for why she couldn't come to family dinners. She started spending more time at his condo and less time at home. I watched my daughter slip away from me, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Then one day in late September, something happened that changed everything. I was at work, teaching a class at the community college where I've been an adjunct professor of literature for the last 12 years. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. On the other end was a woman's voice, tight with anxiety. She said her name was Rebecca, and she needed to talk to me about Thomas Reeves. My heart stopped. I excused myself from my classroom, told my students to work on their reading comprehension questions, and I went into my office and closed the door. Rebecca's story was chilling. She had been engaged to Thomas 3 years ago. They had met at a charity event, much like how he had met Madison. Everything had been perfect. He had been attentive, romantic, charming. He had asked her about her family's financial situation. She had answered honestly because she was in love and she thought they were going to spend the rest of their lives together. And then, after 6 months of engagement, she had discovered something that made her blood run cold. Thomas had been working with her mother's financial advisor to access information about her trust fund. He had been taking out loans against her name without her knowledge. He had convinced her mother to add his name to some of her mother's investment accounts. By the time Rebecca figured out what was happening, he had embezzled nearly $200,000 from her family. When she confronted him, he played the victim. He said she had misunderstood. He said he was just trying to help manage their shared finances. He said she was being paranoid and cruel. But then Rebecca did something that probably saved her life. She went to the police. She filed a report, and the police contacted Thomas, and he immediately vanished. He left the state. He changed his phone number. He disappeared like smoke. And Rebecca spent the next 3 years worried that he would come back. Worried that he would try to ruin her reputation. Worried that he would make her pay for pressing charges. But he never did. Instead, he apparently changed his name, changed his appearance, moved to a new city, and started the whole process over again. "Your daughter is in danger," Rebecca told me, her voice breaking on the phone. "He does this over and over again. He targets women whose fathers are dead or absent. Women who will be lonely and more trusting. Women whose families have money. And he is very, very good at it." I hung up the phone, and I was sick. I went to the bathroom, and I threw up from pure stress and fear. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't drive home. I sat in my office for an hour, just staring at the wall, processing what I'd just learned. Then I did something I had never done before. I hired a private investigator. His name was David Chen, and he was a former cop who had opened his own practice about 5 years ago. I had never imagined myself as the kind of person who would hire someone to follow another person around, but here I was. I met with David in his office, a small place above a coffee shop downtown, and I told him everything. I told him about Thomas's questions. I told him about the way he had isolated Madison. I told him about Rebecca's call. And I told him that I needed to know the truth before my daughter married this man. David took the case. For the next 2 weeks, he investigated Thomas Reeves. What he found was even worse than I had imagined. Thomas had been engaged 5 times in the past 10 years. 5 times. 5 different women in 5 different states. And each engagement had ended the same way. Either the woman had figured out that he was stealing from them, or her family had discovered something was wrong, or he had simply moved on once he felt like the family didn't have enough money for him to bother with. There were no actual criminal convictions, though. Rebecca's family had chosen not to press charges after they discovered the theft, because Thomas had threatened to expose some embarrassing information about Rebecca's past. He had leverage on each of these women. He had collected secrets and used them as blackmail. He was a predator. He was a con artist. He was someone who had perfected the art of manipulation over many, many years. And my daughter was about to marry him. David also discovered that Thomas's real name wasn't even Thomas. He had been born with a different name in a different state, and he had changed it legally about 8 years ago. He had multiple social security numbers. He had multiple driver's licenses. He had a completely fabricated professional history. Everything about him was a lie. When David presented me with his findings, he laid out a thick folder on the table between us. Inside were photographs, documents, financial records, and statements from previous victims. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was the kind of thing that makes you question your ability to protect the people you love. "So what do I do?" I asked David, my voice very small. "You have to tell your daughter," he said. "You have to tell her everything, and you have to hope that she believes you." But I knew Madison wouldn't believe me. I knew that if I went to her with this information, she would think I was trying to sabotage her relationship. She would think I was a controlling mother who couldn't let her daughter grow up and make her own choices. She would pull away from me even more. She would run straight into his arms, and she would marry him anyway, just to prove to me that I was wrong. So instead, I did something else. I called Thomas. I called him, and I asked him to meet me for coffee. He agreed, which should have told me something about his confidence in his ability to manipulate me. We met at a small cafe near the community college. He arrived wearing an expensive suit and his trademark smile. He stood up when I approached the table, and he hugged me like I was his mother, not the mother of his fiancée. "Patricia, so great to see you," he said. Using my first name in that way, he had that made it feel like we were old friends conspiring together. We ordered coffee and we sat down, and for a while we made small talk. We talked about the weather. We talked about the wedding plans. We talked about the honeymoon they were thinking of taking to Greece. And then I said to him, very calmly, "I know what you are." I watched his face. I watched his eyes. For just a fraction of a second, something shifted. A mask slipped. Then the smile came back, maybe slightly tighter than before. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. I think you do, I replied. I know about Rebecca. I know about the others. I know that your name isn't even Thomas Reeves. I know that you're a con artist and a thief, and I know that you were planning to steal from my family and disappear the moment my daughter signed the marriage certificate. He didn't deny it. That was the scariest part. He didn't deny any of it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and he laughed. It was a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Well, Patricia, I have to say I'm impressed, he said. You're smarter than the other mothers. But here's the thing. You can't prove any of this. You can hire all the private investigators you want, but there's no evidence that would hold up in court. And if you tell Madison what you've found, do you really think she's going to believe you? She's in love with me. She's told all of her friends that we're getting married. She's chosen the flowers. She's chosen the music. Are you really willing to humiliate her by forcing her to admit that her mother was right and she was wrong? He was right. I hated it, but he was right. And that's when I realized that the only way to stop this was to do something differently. That's when I came up with a plan. I went home that evening, and I sat down with a pen and a piece of paper, and I started to write. I wrote out all of the information that David had found. I wrote out the names of the previous victims. I wrote out the financial records showing the money he had stolen. I wrote out the fake identities he had used. And then I did something that would either save my daughter or ruin our relationship forever. I told Madison the truth. Not in an accusatory way. Not in a way that made her feel stupid or betrayed. But in a way that made her see for herself what he really was. I showed her Rebecca's police report. I showed her the financial documents. I showed her the photographs of his previous fiancés. I sat next to her on her bed, in the room she had slept in since she was a little girl, and I watched as the realization slowly dawned on her face. He's not who he says he is, she whispered. No, he's not, I said. And then she cried. Oh, how she cried. She cried for hours, and I held her, and I let her grieve the man she thought she loved. But Thomas was still expecting to marry her. The wedding was only 2 weeks away. The invitations had been sent. The deposits had been made. Canceling now would cause questions. It would alert him that something was wrong. He might run. He might disappear before anyone could gather enough evidence to prosecute him. Or worse, he might decide that if he couldn't have access to our money, he would ruin us out of spite. So we made a decision. Madison and I made a decision together, like partners, like the team we had always been. We would let the wedding happen. But we wouldn't actually be getting married. Instead, we would be setting a trap. We went to the police. We gave them all of David's evidence. We told them what we were planning to do. The detective assigned to our case, a woman named Officer Sarah Martinez, told us that what we were planning was dangerous and risky. But she also told us that she had been waiting for years to catch someone like Thomas doing something like this, and that she would help us. For the next 2 weeks, we prepared. Madison continued to act like an engaged woman. She went to dress fittings. She went to his condo. She acted like she was excited about the wedding. And Thomas, completely unaware of what was coming, walked around like he had already won. He had already started planning how he would convince Madison's mother to add him to her investment accounts after they were married. He had already started looking into what Madison's inheritance actually totaled. He had already started thinking about what their life together would look like once he had access to everything. The night before the wedding, Madison came to my house. We stayed up late, sitting on the porch, looking out at the neighborhood where she had grown up. I'm scared, she said. I know, I replied. But you're also brave. You're doing this because you love this family and because you want to protect other women from what he does. She nodded, and then she handed me a note. The note she had written. I had suggested the idea to her weeks ago. I had told her that when the moment came, when she was standing at the altar and she knew she couldn't go through with this, she should have a physical symbol. Something that would give her permission to act. Something that would make it real. She had spent an hour writing that note. In it, she poured out her heart. She wrote about her father, who she barely remembered but who had taught her that family was everything. She wrote about the realization that she had been betrayed by someone she trusted. She wrote about her love for me and how grateful she was. That I had never given up on trying to protect her, even when she had pushed back. She wrote about her own strength, the strength she had discovered in the past 2 weeks of knowing the truth. And then she wrote the word Mom at the end because that was the agreement we had made. When I read the note aloud, she would understand that it was time. We placed it carefully in her bouquet of white roses. We practiced the moment over and over again, making sure it was timed perfectly. On the morning of the wedding, Madison got ready as if this was the happiest day of her life. She put on her white dress, the one she had chosen before she knew the truth about Thomas. She had her hair and makeup done. She looked like a bride. She looked beautiful, and her eyes were clear. They were the eyes of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The church was packed. 200 people had come to watch my daughter marry a man named Thomas Reeves, a man who didn't actually exist. We walked down the aisle together, her hand on my arm, and I could feel her trembling. But it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. The groom stood at the altar, and he smiled when he saw her. That same predatory smile that had fooled so many people. The music played. The priest began to speak. Madison looked beautiful and betrayed and strong, all at the same time. And then, as we approached the moment where the priest would ask if anyone objected to this union, Madison did what we had planned. She reached into her bouquet, and she pulled out the note. And she handed it to me. 200 people gasped. The groom's smile faded. And I, Patricia Mitchell, opened that note, and I began to read my daughter's words aloud. I read about her father. I read about her strength. I read about the love that had saved her. And by the time I finished reading, the police were entering the church. Officer Martinez and 3 other officers walked up the aisle, and they handcuffed Thomas Reeves, or whatever his real name actually was, right there at the altar. He didn't struggle. He didn't try to run. Instead, he laughed. That same laugh I had heard in the coffee shop. The laugh of someone who had been beaten at his own game, but who still couldn't quite believe it. As they led him out of the church, he looked back at Madison. And she looked back at him. And in that moment, she took her power back. The guests erupted in chaos. People were talking, questioning, confused. But Madison walked out of that church with her head held high, and I followed her, my hand in hers. We didn't stay for the reception. We didn't listen to the speeches or eat the expensive food. Instead, we went back to my house, and we sat on the same porch where we had sat the night before, and we cried together. Not from sadness, but from relief, from survival, from the knowledge that we had beaten someone who thought he was unbeatable. The aftermath of that day was complicated. Thomas was arrested and charged with fraud and embezzlement, not just from our family but from the 3 previous families who came forward once they heard what had happened. Rebecca agreed to testify against him. So did the other women. Their courage gave them permission to be angry about what had been done to them. The case made local news. It made regional news. It eventually made national news. The headline was something like "Serial Con Artist Exposed at Altar," and suddenly everyone was talking about what had happened in our church that day. Some people thought Madison was brave. Some people thought she was foolish for not canceling the wedding. Some people thought I was a controlling mother who should have called the police immediately. Some people thought we were heroes. Some people thought we were attention-seeking. I stopped caring about what people thought somewhere around day 3 after the arrest. What mattered was that my daughter was safe. What mattered was that other families were protected. What mattered was that Thomas, whoever he really was finally going to face consequences for the damage he had caused. The trial took 8 months. During those 8 months, Madison and I grew closer than we had ever been. We went to therapy together, where we processed the betrayal and the fear and the incredible strength it had taken to stop him. We talked about trust and how to rebuild it after it had been shattered. We talked about family and how it was the one thing that couldn't be taken from us, no matter how hard someone tried. We talked about love and how it looked different now. Less like the fairy tale she had been taught to believe in, and more like the real, hard, beautiful thing that it actually was. When the trial finally ended, Thomas was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He would be in his 60s by the time he got out if he even made it that long. As they led him out of the courtroom, Madison stood up. And she clapped. Not in a mean way. Not in a cruel way. But in a way that said, I beat you. My mother beat you. And we're going to be fine. Officer Martinez came up to us after the trial. She hugged Madison. She hugged me. And she told us that the information we had gathered, the cooperation we had provided, had helped her solve 3 cold cases from the previous 5 years. 3 families finally got answers about what had happened to their daughters. 3 families got closure. You did that, Officer Martinez said to Madison. You saved lives. Madison smiled. And for the first time since all of this had started, it was her own smile. It wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. It was the smile of a woman who had learned that she was stronger than she had ever known. A year after the wedding that never happened, Madison fell in love again. Not with a man this time, but with herself first. She started her own business, a consulting firm that helps women identify signs of financial abuse and manipulation in their relationships. She works with domestic violence organizations. She works with police departments. She teaches seminars to other women about how to listen to their instincts, even when those instincts conflict with the people they love. She has helped more than 500 families identify and escape similar situations. She has prevented what could have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraud. And she has given other women permission to be suspicious, to ask hard questions, to protect themselves and their families. I'm so proud of her. Every single day, I'm proud of her. Just last month, a woman came to Madison's office who recognized the exact same patterns in her fiancé's behavior. The questions about family finances, the isolation tactics, the excessive charm masking something darker underneath. Because Madison had shared our story publicly, because she had written about the warning signs on her blog, this woman knew what to look for. She recognized the red flags before it was too late. She called the police. She got out safely. That woman is now going to college. She's building a life on her own terms. That's what Madison's work has accomplished. That's what Speaking Our Truth has made possible. The ripple effects of that day in the church have touched lives I will never meet. They have changed outcomes I will never know about. They have saved people I will never see. But I know they exist because Madison tells me about them. She keeps a journal of every woman who reaches out to thank her. That journal is now over 300 pages long. We laugh sometimes now about that wedding day. We joke about how it turned out to be quite the story. We joke about how nobody will ever forget it. We joke about how Madison had the most dramatic exit from a wedding that anyone has ever had. But underneath the jokes, there's something else. There's gratitude. Gratitude that we trusted each other when it would have been easier not to. Gratitude that I didn't let her push me away, even when she tried. Gratitude that she was willing to listen, even when the truth hurt. Gratitude that we survived something that was meant to destroy us. The strength that we both discovered in ourselves during those weeks before the wedding has become the foundation for everything else in our lives. Madison is stronger. I am stronger. We are stronger together. And that's something that can never be taken away from us. If you're still listening, if you've made it all the way to the end of the story, then I want to ask you something. I want to ask you to think about the people in your life. The people you love. The people you trust. Are there patterns that worry you? Are there questions you're afraid to ask? Are there things your instincts are telling you that you're ignoring because you don't want to be the paranoid one? I'm asking you to listen to those instincts. I'm asking you to trust that voice inside of you, the one that knows when something isn't right. Because that voice is there to protect you. That voice is there to protect the people you love. That voice is what saved my daughter's life. And I promise you, if you're brave enough to listen to it, it will save yours too. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Don't ignore that feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong. Trust yourself the way Madison learned to trust me, and the way I learned to trust my own instincts. Life is too short, and love is too precious, to waste it on people who don't deserve your faith. Your intuition is a gift. Treat it like one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for subscribing to all of Revenge Stories. The stories I tell aren't always happy. They're not always comfortable. But they're always real, and they're always told by someone who lived through them. Because I believe that there's power in speaking the truth. I believe that there's power in telling stories that were meant to stay silent. I believe that we're stronger together than we are apart. And I believe that if we listen to each other, if we believe each other, if we support each other, then we can survive anything. So please keep watching. Keep listening. Keep believing in the power of the human story. And most importantly, keep trusting the people who love you enough to tell you the hard truths, even when those truths are difficult to hear. Share this story with someone you care about. Share it with the people in your life who need to hear it. Share it with the women who are struggling to trust their own instincts. Share it with the families who need to know that they're not alone. That's how we break the cycle. That's how we protect each other. This is Olive, reminding you that trust is precious, but instincts save lives. I'll see you in the next one.